Hello and welcome back to another Zeta team project and the beginning of our first Star Technology walkthrough series. If you're not familiar with this mod pack, it's a GregTech based skyblock pack where you work yourself up from a single tree through more and more advanced technology until it all accumulates into a fancy Discord role. Stargate, sorry. It's not entirely beginner friendly at the moment, but it's definitely among the easiest GregTech mod packs to complete as far as I know. I already have quite a bit of history on Star Technology, with this being the start of my 4th run on the pack. The last run I did was a bit of a speed run just to see what all had changed on this last update, so I'm ready to take a more laid back pace with this run. That being said, I personally find the early game of this pack to be kind of a drag up until AE2, so I'm gonna be going through the first couple of tiers of progression a bit quicker than normal. For those wondering, this whole run will be on hotfix 5 of the Zeta update, no relation, so if you're on a different version of the pack, some features may be different. The quest book on this version of the pack is pretty easy to follow along with for the early game, but feel free to ask questions in the comments about anything I may have skipped over. With that out of the way, let's get into the actual gameplay. As you can see, my friend Scarlet and I have already gotten started doing pretty standard skyblock activities, just collecting wood, pebbles, and sieving materials just to get some basic stuff set up like early storage and barrels. The GregTech barrels are especially important here because we'll need a lot of clay to get our first multi-blocks made, so make a couple of them at least. The next bit of this is slightly repetitive, so I'll be right back once I get some create started, just to save you from watching me slave over the same 3 or 4 tasks for the next 5 minutes. So, I'll be right back. Okay, so I'm back with some large water wheels, and Scarlet is setting up our colossal chests for early game storage while we get this done. But I advise you to watch some create tutorials in addition to this, because you're going to be needing it quite a bit in the early game if you want to get things done quickly. But I can give you a quick rundown on what I'm getting set up here. I went with large water wheels mostly because they're dirt cheap and 8 will be exactly as many as I need for what I'm doing. But I'm getting a mechanical mixer set up, a mechanical press set up, and 2 encased fans. With everything running at a max speed of 256 RPM, medium impact machines like the fans will use a full water wheel each. High impact machines will use 2, and 8 times impact machines like our press will use 4 water wheels. So after getting the gear ratio set up, I'm gonna start by setting up the press and mixer for cheaper plates and getting some alloys mixed. For some reason though, with the alloy mixer, I always forget that it gets hooked up kind of weird. Anyways, once I'm done having skill issues with create, I'm gonna make myself a drum, then I'll get started on messing around with barrels for some quality of life stuff. Like I said earlier, we need a lot of clay, and to make clay a bit easier to manage, this drum will be very helpful. So trust me, make one. You'll carry it around for the entire early game until you get AE2, I promise. It'll make barrels that much less painful to deal with here at the start especially. My first goal here is to get the aqueous accumulator from these so I can pump water from an infinite water source to the barrels. The only thing I'm missing for this is lead, but unfortunately lead is going to require some high-tech barrel chemistry and a bit of luck. Get a notebook, or better yet, just check the quest book because this will take a few steps. To get lead, for the aqueous accumulator, we'll need galena, a chance output from sieving crushed blackstone. In order to get that blackstone, we'll need witch water, but that unfortunately requires mycelium spores, which comes as a chance output from sieving mud, yet another barrel recipe. To my relief, it looks like Scarlet got the witch water part of the process done for me already, so that saves me some work, but I'm gonna do more mud sieving here in a minute for other things that come from it besides mycelium spores. The witch water itself is at least enough for me to get started on the blackstone, so I'm grateful for the help. Keep in mind that the barrel has different modes for different types of recipes, and each time you change the mode, you need to mess with the barrel's inventory, otherwise it will just sit there idling. I'm not sure why they do this, but this goes for all machines that change modes in this pack. It's just a thing that they do. Thankfully, all the sieving we did though also gave us sugarcane and some other useful things we can use for later, but I recommend getting some of that sugarcane planted just because we'll need it to make paper for low voltage circuit parts later, and it grows pretty slow. Once I get a more conveniently located water source set up, I'm going to plant the sugarcane, make my aqueous accumulator, and then pump the water from the accumulator into our barrels with pipes to make the process of using them even easier. Also, yes, I'm aware that these pipes are pretty trash for TPS, but this is a super temporary setup and they're cheap, which is what I need right now because we're broke. I'm also going to set up a quick witch water passive because it's a painfully slow recipe on these barrels. To be fair, this is early game, so things being slow at the start just makes sense. Since I'm using one, I feel like this is a good time to express how much I love the usefulness of the GregTech wrench. Like, it's not much, but the fact that it works on pipes and has several uses with GregTech machines, blocks, and recipes feels like such a fantastic quality of life thing. That said, the crowbar still needs some love. I hope it gets used for more than just one task in the future. Anyways, now that I'm done screwing with pipes and yapping about Greg tools, let's check out the passive stone automation Scarlet set up for us while we were doing that. It's a pretty simple setup that uses thermal fluid cells to pump water from aqueous accumulators into the stone barrels around them to make cobble for us. You'll also see us taking advantage of leaves holding water quite a bit in the early game, mostly for space efficiency reasons. Leaves or not, I recommend this setup or something similar to get some stone going so you can start crushing it into dust for the clay I kept bringing up earlier. I'm gonna do exactly that and get some clay started to start working towards the primitive blast furnaces for steel ingots, mostly because they're the first major milestone in this pack. There's still way more to do before we can get some power set up, but having a bunch of steel by the time we do get power will make things a lot faster, so I recommend getting enough clay for 4 to 8 of these right off the bat. Trust. While that clay is being made in the barrels, I'm gonna start getting those encased fans set up for bulk blasting and bulk haunting. Putting lava in front of an encased fan will allow it to smelt items way faster than a furnace, and a fire on top of the soul sand we got from witch water and sand earlier will allow us to make soul sand faster for soul infused ingots later on. I know I just said soul a lot, but bear with me. So fast forward a couple of minutes, we have quite a bit of clay smelted up into bricks now, and after painstakingly grinding the clay and bricks together and sending them through another round in the bulk blaster, we'll have enough fire bricks to make our first multi-blocks. I'm gonna be a bit lazy on my run and only do 4 primitive blast furnaces since they'll do well enough, but you could go all the way up to 8. With wall sharing, I can fit all 4 of them in a 5x5 spot, and then each one is just a 3x3x4, with the center blocks being empty on the top 3 layers of the multi-block. Now all we need to complete our multi-blocks is the controllers, and for this I recommend being able to read because I apparently cannot, and I ended up making 4 primitive ore factory controllers instead of the ones for the primitive blast furnaces. So after retaking elementary school, I got the correct controllers and the multi-blocks finally formed so I could load them and move on to other important early game automations. Since I accidentally used effortless building and placed these the wrong way, it's a good time to mention that shift-clicking machines or controllers with a GregTech wrench will rotate them for you. I actually had to relearn how the mechanical crafters work for this, but I worked on making crushing wheels with them so we could have passive gravel, sand, dust, clay, and flint here in a second. Don't worry, I'll replace that chest with a regular barrel here in a second. I know it's not ideal. While I was making crushing wheels, Scarlet built a pretty solid wood farm on a gantry contraption that actually doesn't use any stress units. So this can even run off of a single water wheel, like we did it. It just slides down to one end, flips a redstone signal to turn around, and then unloads the items from any trees it cuts down into a drawer at the other end. The deployers underneath recycle the saplings from it to make sure all the dirt blocks constantly have saplings on them. I'm not sure how fast it is as far as wood generation since it's based on a couple variables, some of them being a little bit random seemingly, but at the time of recording it has only been up for a few minutes and it's turned out over 1,300 logs. For some reason, I then got the urge to prepare for later and make some coke ovens. You probably only need one, but I made extra bricks, so no reason for me to not make two. The coke ovens aren't immediately important, but they'll come in handy later for the large farm and large barrel. The hatches can't be shared on these apparently, but after adjusting for that, I got them running with logs for creosote. With that handled, Scarlet and I moved on to the crushing wheel setup I made the mechanical crafters for earlier. Again, we're going to use water wheels for this, but later we'll just hook that up to the steam engines to try to save my FPS for a little bit. I'm bound to have performance issues recording this pack while playing it, but we'll attempt to minimize it as much as possible. This contraption isn't very complicated, it's just 3 rows of crushing wheels with each pair spinning in towards the same direction as the conveyor belt underneath them. The row with 1 pair is for gravel, the row with 2 is for sand, flint, and clay, and the last row with 3 pairs is for dust. For now, it'll have to be fed cobblestone manually by putting it in drawers on one end, but after it's crushed, the items will end up nicely in the drawers at the other end of the conveyors. Once we have laser I/O, which requires gold, we'll be able to use it wirelessly to move cobble to these, but until we set up the primitive ore factories, we won't be able to do that. On the bright side, with crushing automated, we have passive clay being made, and that will make the primitive ore factories considerably easier. So I'll be back in a few minutes after I go through the grueling process of making 2 stacks of fire bricks for them. I somehow managed to lose the footage of the rest of these being built, but now that the factories are done, I'm going to load them with water, charcoal blocks, and a couple different ores for their unique byproducts. The really important one here is gold though, because it unlocks not only laser I/O like I mentioned before, but also create steam engines, which will allow us to burn fuel for an enormous amount of stress units, which we can even harness for power here at the end of this episode. While Scarlet is setting up those steam engines for us, I'm going to get some rubber plantations built. They're actually probably my favorite early game multi-block now. The only real downside to them is how specific they are with the structure requirements, but it's still really cheap and renders the old arboreal extractors entirely useless. Rightly so, because they have pretty bad documentation, but that's technical stuff we don't need to get into. Just know that they're pointless now that the rubber plantation exists. With the multi-blocks formed, we just need to put the wood screws in the controllers, then they'll start pumping latex for us. To make this setup even better, we can add a drum with pipes pushing into it to give these more storage. So after getting that set up, I left for dinner while Scarlet kept working, but I actually came back to a little bit more work than I expected. In addition to the steam engine and laser I/O, we now have generator coils to get power started and passive sieving, which is pretty much the last of what we needed to be able to fly through LV on the next episode. The deployers here are given sieving ingredients and act as a player sieving for us, while the item collector pushes items into the storage below. In this case, the storage controller below it disperses it to the linked drawers. This setup should last until MV or early HV depending on what you're using for power generation, but either way, with all of this setup, we're pretty much rich as far as pre-low voltage standards go. If you're using Create for power like us, upgrading the magnets for efficiency is definitely worth it and actually pretty cheap up to the fluctuated magnetite ones, but 7 to 8 coils should be enough to get a bit of LV stuff up and running. Now that our primitive blast furnaces are done running though, I have one more important tip before I wrap this up. I probably should have shared this when I first set up our steelworks, but the Farmer's Delight stoves with a skillet on top make getting raw iron way easier. It's functionally the same as a campfire, except that it can hold a full stack of ingots, and I think it's faster, though I could be off on that last part. Just like the sieving setup, we can collect the ingots for this in a drawer with an item collector, but with 10 of them, we'll be able to process a load of 640 raw iron ingots. You could add modular routers or laser I/O to this to make it fully passive, though I don't think all that is necessary. I also use full block recipes in the furnaces because it allows you to not have to mess with it for 9 times as long as if you're putting in single ingot recipes, though it's the same amount of time per ingot, so I mean really it's up to preference. With a couple of furnaces and a good number of stoves, we'll be more than taken care of on steel up until we get the clean room and early HV at least. If you've noticed the solid blast furnace in the quest book though, just ignore it because it's a scam and it's always been one, so as long as you keep your primitive blast furnaces running, they'll have your back for a while, trust. Well, with that, we're actually out of content between now and low voltage, so that's all I got for today, but we accomplished quite a bit. Sorry if everything felt a little bit rapid fire today, but I was trying to avoid as much fluff and filler as possible. You've probably also noticed that we have a bit of a lawn base going on, but bear with me here because I have big plans for the base after we get AE2 set up, which will probably come at the end of the video after this next one. Either way, we're more than ready to tackle LV now, so thanks for sticking around for an exciting day of star technology. See you on the next one. Ciao.